Lovely cushion header. And Ciaran! What a head, son! What a head!
Hello and welcome back to the Premier League Trio podcast. My name is Haider and I'm your host as usual today. I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran. He's a great friend of the podcast. Obviously, he's a regular now on Red Devils Day Talk. Can't even get my words out today. And because I'm just so excited because we've got a new fantasy football show. So, Ciaran, how are you doing today, mate?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's been an interesting few days, especially with all the news coming out. So it's good to put the focus a little bit away from transfer talk. So
absolutely. It's just for the listeners, this is going to be a new weekly show. It'll be me and Ciaran. We might bring on a few guests here and there. But what we'll be doing is we'll just be reviewing the weekly fixtures in terms of the fantasy football. So who's obviously scored highly, who hasn't scored so highly. And we'll just be giving tips and just our view on who the trade should be for the week coming, and also just a bit of a breakdown, because I think people do need a source to go and have a look, or a video to go and have a look to help them out. So I know Ciaran's much more in touch with the sort of the data of it, so he'll actually be hosting the show each week. So this is game week 1, but what I'm doing this week is I'm just going to host it this week, and then what we'll do is we'll be running through about 20 minutes, half an hour each week. So make sure you smash that like button, because that will really get this video out to so many more fantasy football fans. And make sure you subscribe, because there's really great content. We're going to be having about 4 shows per week. Like I said, Red Devils Talk will be our weekly Man United show. There'll be the fantasy football show. There'll be the weekly review show, which will be me, myself. Ciaran will be coming on most of the time. Otherwise, it'll be my 2 brothers as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's have a look at the top point scorers in each position last season. I think this is quite an interesting place to start, because I think this is where most people are having a look at their teams and thinking, right, okay, this person was really good last season, so I'm going to put him in. I'm going to start with the goalkeepers, Ciaran, and I'm going to go, well, let's obviously go with number 1. And that is Nick Pope. Now, Nick Pope scored 170 points last season, 15 clean sheets, and he's priced at 5.5 million. That's a ridiculous return, isn't it, for someone, A, who doesn't play for one of the big 6 clubs, and B, someone that is actually very reasonably priced. I mean, what was your views on Nick Pope last season?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I think the fact is that the team he's in are very good defensively. So you have a good option there. Even when you're going to go through the next couple, you see the majority of fantasy teams go for kind of the person's favorite team's goalkeeper. And you would think that without looking at the stats, you would think like Alisson or Ederson would have been the top 2. But again, it's not always down to that. It's down to kind of, it's not solely clean sheets, but obviously you see with Nick Pope that last year he got the most and he ends up with the most points, but there's not too much of a difference, as you're probably going to see for the next couple that come along as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing, isn't it? People pick, you think Liverpool had the best defense in terms of goals conceded. They were up there, and so were Man City, but both keepers aren't there. And I think that can definitely be attributed to the fact that both keepers probably had much more less work to do as well. You've got to take into account the amount of saves the keeper's making a game. You look at Burnley, we know they're going to be defensively solid, but Nick Pope's going to make more saves than Alisson's going to make saves. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, he's probably my choice for goalkeeper this season. Let's go on to the next one. And this one is an interesting one, because this is our boy Hendo. And look, I had Hendo in probably... So I started off really strangely with Ederson, I believe. I took him out, it was too expensive. City were conceding a lot of goals. I bought in Pope for a little while, took him out, bought in Hendo, and then I ended with Rui Patricio, but he's not on this list. But talk to me about Hendo, because you look at it, 160 points. Again, just Pope, 13 clean sheets. He was probably the breakout keeper last season, I'd say. And again, priced at 5.5 million this season. But the big caveat is he's probably not going to play as much this year. So talk to me about Hendo, and would you be going anywhere near him?
No, I wouldn't. I had Hendo last year as my goalkeeper because It was actually for a different reason. I suspected that there'll be a lot of teams attacking Sheffield United because I don't think anybody expected them to do what they did. And the way he played in previous seasons, even in lower leagues, he was a great shot stopper. So it was always a good one to bring in. This year, obviously, the issue is he's probably not going to be starting as much with De Gea in goal. You might see a bit of a change in that after the new year. So if, let's say, he takes over from De Gea and his price stays fairly similar, you could probably sub him in later on in the year. But at the start, I don't think it's worth it considering he's not going to be starting in the first couple of months of the season anyway.
Absolutely. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what Solskjaer will do. And we'll talk about the Henderson De Gea, I suppose, dilemma, I was going to say, when we do Red Devils Talk next week. Yeah. So I think it's a great talking point. And that'll be on the head-to-head segment. So that's going to be on most likely every single week on Devil Talks. Make sure you hit that like button because we need to get this video out to more people. But anyway, my last option is Kasper Schmeichel. This one actually surprised me because Leicester had a phenomenal start. Obviously, they were up there with Liverpool. After they got trashed 5-0, their form just dipped. And Schmeichel was conceding a lot of goals. And if you have a look at his statistics, again, he's only just off Pope and Hendo. He's 156 points, 13 clean sheets, same as Henderson. And again, priced at $5.5 million. I mean, that's a good value for money for a player who will be up there in terms of the top 6. So he will get a number of clean sheets next season, but also he's going to have enough work, enough saves, sort of added to his data to be a good choice for next season.
Yeah, it goes to show how good of a start he had last year. The fact that he's come right below Pope and Henderson, even though we all know what happened to Leicester later on in the season where they collapsed both defensively and in attack. Really, I'd say the only player that was playing well for him towards the end of the season was Jamie Vardy. So the fact that he's only, I think, he was 4 points off Henderson. Like, it's for him to do that. And as you mentioned, there was a couple of big games there where they conceded a lot of goals. So it kind of shows how good he was at the start. If maybe the coronavirus didn't happen and they maintained what they would have done, he probably would have been right up there with Pope and probably may have even passed him by. So at $5.5 million, it's a pretty good one if you want a solid keeper.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, I'm probably going to push towards Pope, but he's definitely an option. So let's go on to the defense, Ciaran. You're going to be taking this one on. So talk to me and listeners about what options there are that you've chosen.
Yeah, so for the top point scorers last year, I think it's very obvious. We have the 3 Liverpool defenders. So we've Trent, Alexander-Arnold. So he got 210 points, which is miles above what anyone else. Probably one of the highest scoring defenders that has been there in the last couple of years in fantasy football. Because getting over 200 points, you would be expecting that be a midfielder or an attacker. After that, you have Andy Robertson, which was 181 points. Again, both players are attacking. They get a lot of assists. So it shows why they get a lot of points in defense. You have Van Dijk with 178 then just after them. Again, he comes in and gets a couple important goals, and they play pretty much every single game. So again, they're able to get up points based on that. But again, they're attacking defenders as well, which is kind of what you're looking for in a defense, because there's a lot of good names out there that will be in that kind of 5.5, 5 range that they're solid defenders, but just because they're solid defenders won't get you points. You need defenders that might come up with a couple of goals here and there or might get an assist or two. That's why generally you look for kind of wing backs to put in, because it's not like a normal game of football. You don't need to have 2 centre backs, a right back, a left back. If you have 4 right backs that all get assists, that's better than having a lot of kind of solid defenders that you would normally want to have into a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. That's probably a criticism a lot of people have. I don't play the NFL draft, by the way. Yeah. I know you do, I think. But that's very, very technical, isn't it? There's different milestones and you get points for different things. Unfortunately, when you look at fantasy football, it's actually very basic. It's goals, assists, appearances, obviously clean sheets. And unfortunately, you have fantastic players. They're not based on metric. You could say, for example, someone like Jorginho or Rodri could be on how many passes or how many key passes per game and things like that. And that would change the outlook of the game completely. So I agree with you. I think you've got to have at least one Liverpool defender. For me, I always go with Trent, but he's probably the most expensive one, as we'll talk about later. But let's move on to the midfield, because that's me. And again, it's very, very obvious who it's going to be. I mean, Kevin De Bruyne, Mo Salah, and Sadio Mane. I'm going to say this now. You're going to have, like with the Liverpool defenders, you're going to have at least one of them in. For me, it's probably De Bruyne, but one of Salah and Mane probably you're going to have as well, because it's almost guaranteed goals and assists. And you look at Kevin De Bruyne, 251 points, which is huge. Salah 233 and Mane 221. So all relatively high, and that shows how well Trent did last year. The fact that he was over and not far off Mane. But you look at Kevin De Bruyne, 13 goals, 23 assists, 35 bonus points, and he's actually priced in the bracket just below Salah. There's Aubameyang as well. We'll talk about that later. And Mane at that 12 million. But if you're looking at Kevin De Bruyne, I think he's a shoo-in. Looking at Salah as well, 19 goals, 10 assists, 26 bonus points. Very similar to Mane, who had 18 goals, 10 assists, and 27 bonus points. So if I was, I am going to be doing this, but if I was obviously thinking with my head and not my heart as a United fan, I have these guys in. And that's the key, guys. You've got to play with your head. Whenever I play with my heart and put United players in, especially over the last 7 years, they have not performed. Obviously, we had some good ones last season. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But Ciaran, do you agree with me? You've got to have one of KDB, Salah, and Mane.
Yeah, I think it's, even if you wanted it to be KDB, I think the first week you have to choose Salah or Mane and then just swap them out. If let's say you wanted KDB and City aren't playing the first week, put one of the other two in and then just swap them out the next week, and you have an extra 0.5 million to kind of spend somewhere else in the second week as well, if you wanted to take a little bit of a hit. But again, when you see someone hitting over 250 points, it's very hard not to have them into your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point as well. Just remember that City aren't playing. I believe Burnley aren't playing either, so Nick Pope's probably out. United aren't playing, and there's another team you remember. Villa, yeah. So that's two big teams. Obviously, a chunk of your defense if you're having Nick Pope. So that's something to keep in mind for the listeners. And what I will say is, there's also a strategy. Do you play a free hit, because that's what some people might do, or do you just tactically do it where you might have them on the bench? It's really difficult. But again, to the listeners, hit that like button, because we want to get more people watching this video. Okay, Ciaran, it's your turn. On to the attack now.
Yeah, the attack is one of those tricky ones, because a lot of people associate the best attackers when they play right wing or left wing, which are now part of midfield. I think it was 2 years ago they would have been part of the attack. But last year it was pretty close. There was a couple of good strikers that went up there. We had Jamie Vardy, who was the top scorer as a striker with 210 points. Just behind him was my own Anthony Martial for 200. And then we had Danny Ings, who had a great breakout season last year. But again, you have to think of how consistent do you think will he be able to put up all the points and all the goals he scored from last year? So it is one of those tricky ones. A lot of people associate things like Aubameyang and Mane, Salah, Sterling as kind of those attackers, but you have to remember it's really the center forwards, and this is probably one area where you need to look for value, and it's not always going to be the kind of highest price player that's going to get you all the points, because when you look at them, there's not a big difference between kind of the top three, and when you kind of go down further along the list, we'll see it later, like with Raul Jimenez and things like that. So I think it's one of those that, from what we've seen, you're probably going to be spending the majority of your points on your midfielders, because they're kind of more of the goal scorers. There's a couple of them in the forward line, as I mentioned, with Vardy, Martial, who I still expect to be up the top in the goal scoring this season, but it is one to kind of take into account.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is probably an area which I definitely slip up on, because you look at the big value strikers and you think, okay, I'm going to chuck him in. But actually, I had Danny Ings for a big chunk of last season, probably the best pound for pound, sort of goals to value ratio in the whole of the Fantasy Football League last year. And definitely Raul Jimenez is another shout. But this is an area, I think, you're right, where there is a few bargains to be had, and we'll talk about that later. But let's move on now to the highest value players in each position. So we're going to pick sort of the 2 or 3 of them, and I'm going to start with goalkeeper. So the obvious ones, obviously, Alisson and Ederson, both valued at 6 million. Honestly, this is me personally, I'd be avoiding both of them. I'll tell you why, because I think that when you look at Liverpool's defenders, you've obviously got Trent, Robertson, and Van Dijk. They're going to offer more, I think, than Alisson. Alisson might get you a consistent clean sheet most weeks, but you're very rarely going to get, I think, those bonus points. And you're also going to very rarely be able to get, for example, what Trent can get you. So that's goals and definitely assists from that position. So for me, those two are obviously the highest rated ones. Ederson perhaps is maybe a better shout because City's defense, again, we're unsure who's going to play. Koulibaly potentially to still come in. That's another option. But you're looking at their fullbacks. Who's playing left back? If Mendy can stay fit, he can. You don't know, though. It could be Zinchenko. I think it's going to be Nathan Ake, if I'm being honest. Yeah, I think, and that's where he played. That's where he started off, I believe, when he was at Chelsea. And then you've got a whole raft of 5.5 rated ones. You've got David De Gea, who I would be staying very clear of, if I'm being honest. And he used to be the shoe-in for me, but you don't know what De Gea is going to turn up. You have a look, obviously, in the international break. I think he was very good, but he's obviously been in. For me, it's a decline over the last 18 months. You can't rely on him. Obviously, you got the Popes, the Schmeichels of the world, who are probably the ones you should go for. Rui Patricio is another one as well. I think Wolves have done some excellent business, and they probably will continue to do some more business there. Yeah. So those are the ones I'd go for. So who are you choosing, Ciaran, for the defense?
For the defense, again, it's in terms of the top point scorers and the highest value, it kind of goes hand in hand there. It's still the 3 players who are Liverpool. I tend to stay away from having many players on the one team because often if they have a bad week, then so do you. I think the highest rated player is Trent at 7.5 million. Now, with the amount that points he gets, it's a no-brainer that he kind of has to be part of the team. So he would be the first one that I would be putting on. I'd probably stay clear of Van Dijk because, again, I think you're going to probably see more teams try and attack Liverpool a little bit differently than they did last year. And it's going to be hard for them to maintain the levels that they have up to now because it's been so good. Again, I'm one of those players that likes to play more wing backs than centre backs because, again, if there's a week where I'm struggling to get players in, I'll put a centre back or two that I know they play on a team that'll get a clean sheet and they'll get a couple points for me. But unless you're playing against a weakened team where you think that Liverpool will be attacking a lot and you'll get a couple corners where you might get a goal or two for Van Dijk, I'd probably stick with either Trent or Robertson. Yeah,
I agree with that completely. And that's a strategy I'm going to be doing going forward. I think there's some decent fullbacks. And you've got to look out as well. If United do sign someone like Reguilon, that's a very, very big one because United have attacked in the past a lot down the left. As United fans, we know that the right's been neglected, and those overlapping runs that Shaw was making will be made possibly by someone who's got more of an attacking threat. You look at his numbers this season for Sevilla. So let's move on to the midfield. I know we're conscious of time. Listeners, make sure you hit that like button. We've got 12 minutes left. Let's go on to the midfield and the obvious candidates. See, Aubameyang at midfield for me doesn't seem right.
No,
it's one of those ones which he plays obviously off the left a lot. He's not really been playing central much under Arteta, but for me that just doesn't make sense. Obviously, then he's a striker, and you got Mane and Salah. Now that could work for you potentially because Aubameyang is probably as close as you get to guaranteed goals. He's going to score a lot next season. He'll be up there with the best. So perhaps him moving to midfield that actually helps you because then you can fit in more strikers up front. You could get an Ings, Menez, a Martial, other strikers as well. But one notable increase I want to talk about is Bruno at 10.5 million. For me, Bruno will probably be the United player that I'm definitely looking at. I think he's a very, very good player. Look at his stats last season, and I think he's just going to get better with more rest and a bit more refreshed. So he's the one to look out for. Ciaran, talk to me about the midfielder options, and then let me know what you think about your attacking options.
Yeah, I think mine's the same kind of format as I'm going to probably put Bruno on the team this year because what he put up in not a lot of time was very impressive. And he's the type of player that playing with Pogba for the whole season, playing with the likes of Van de Beek for the season, and then how if United are able to get the Sancho deal over the line, you have three players up front there that at any moment can score. So it just takes one pass or even that little bit of extra space. So I think Bruno's a great one for 10.5.
Penalties
Also,
as well.
yeah, that's true. And also the very similar to what I said with De Bruyne. Maybe not this week, but might be one to put in from next week. Aubameyang, if you're looking for someone just for week one, is probably a great option because again, he's probably going to end up scoring. It's not a very difficult test that Arsenal have at the weekend, so you're probably looking at the Liverpool players and Arsenal players for the weekend in terms of matchups. In terms of the strikers, the top kind of rated ones was Sergio Aguero's the first one. For me, while he's excellent, I don't know if I can trust his injury record the last kind of year or so. Also, it seems like it's coming to the time where they're trying to get Jesus in there instead of Aguero. Then you have Harry Kane. Again, I'm just kind of against a lot of the Mourinho style strikers because I don't feel they get enough opportunities. If Kane gets one, he'll score, but how many chances will he get during the season? We saw as United fans the lack of chances we had in the box. It's probably not one. And then you have Vardy, who was the top point scorer last year. So if it was out of those three, I'd be going Vardy. But again, like I said, there are a lot of options this year in the forward line and some good players coming into the Premier League that you could possibly use there as well.
Definitely Harry Kane's an interesting one. I agree with you on Aguero. Aguero, Pep just can kill your game week. You don't know who he's going to rotate, and that's the same with all of his options. He's got such a wide pool of and depth, strength and depth when it comes to options. So for me, City a difficult one to obviously look at. But let's move on to the bargains. I think this is really important. So I'm going to start with the goalkeepers, and the first one's Matt Ryan for me at Brighton at £4.5 million. It's a steal. 135 points last season. So obviously not at the top of upper echelons, obviously with the likes of the Popes and the Hendersons of the world. But, it's still a decent return, 9 clean sheets. He's definitely someone, if you want to go and add more money, obviously higher up the pitch, he's someone that will be, one, have a lot of action to do, and two, he'll have a decent return. So that's one to look out for. Now, this one's interesting. It's Martinez that plays for Arsenal. Now, we don't know who's going to start at Arsenal, but when I've spoken to a few of my Arsenal mates, they're saying that it might be Martinez. So, again, £4.5 million. He only conceded 9 goals when he came into the team, and that's a good return, especially when you don't really consider Arsenal to be a defensive powerhouse. But they've tightened up under Arteta, so that's one to watch, but that could be a risk. And finally, Ramsdale, just been bought by Sheffield United. He had obviously a tougher season last season, conceding a lot of goals. I mean, Bournemouth were terrible at the back, but at $5 million, so it's a little bit higher price, but he'll have a very strong defensive front of him. Look at Sheffield United. They're going to be compact. They're going to be strong defensively. Their defensive options. I'm sure Kieran's going to talk about a few of them now, but they're going to be such steals when you've got a lot of money being spent elsewhere. So those will be my 3 keepers, Kieran.
Yeah, I agree, especially with Matt Ryan, and even this year you'll see Ben White come back to Brighton, so that might help him a little bit too. When it comes to the defenders, the funny thing is the bargain defender for me is the most expensive defender is Trent Alexander-Arnold, because again, like I mentioned, when you score over 200 points, it's hard. But when we look at some of the other guys, one of them I would say, based on kind of how good Sheffield United were last week, was John Egan. So again, he's worth $5 million, and he was one of the highest rated or the highest point scoring defenders last year, kind of behind all the Liverpool players. But then what I did is kind of look at some of those players that broke out after the lockdown, because again, it's one of those that there's a lot of changing in the defensive ranks for a lot of teams this year. One that I looked at was Southampton's Kyle Walker-Peters, because while he didn't get many points last year, when it comes towards the end of that season, he was one of the kind of key players in that defensive line for Southampton. Got a couple of assists towards the end of the season, so he's one to look out for. The one that I would have put in my team if it wasn't for a lot of the rumors recently with Wolves was Ruben Vinagre, because again, Johnny is out injured for at least the first month or two of the season. So whoever kind of goes in instead of him would be a very good option. Now, the difference is there's been a lot of rumors with Alex Telles. So if he came in, I'd assume he would be rated a lot higher than 4.5 million. You also have a lot of these kind of go in with some of the injury players. So Pereira for Leicester is injured for the first month. So they had James Justin, came in instead. And again, Leicester do allow their wing backs to attack, so it would be a good option there, 4.5. But other than that, a lot of them, you see a lot of the centre backs that will be in kind of the 4.5, 5 range, where there's not much difference when you look at the points and you look at kind of the potential there. The last one, which is a little bit more expensive, if you're looking for maybe a newer face to a team, you'd probably look at Matt Doherty going to Spurs. He got a lot of points last year. He was one of the highest point scorers for the defenders, and he's worth 6 million. For me, it's a little bit too much if you're getting Trent on the team. But if you're not going with Trent, Matt Doherty is a good backup option for kind of that role in your fantasy team.
He's the one which I religiously relied on last season. But then you look at the system, Spurs are probably not going to play 3 at the back. So that is a problem. I just want to see how he looks as a right back in a 4. I have not seen him play that. You might have done, obviously.
He plays like that for Ireland, and I don't really see as much. I don't see as much of the attacking sense, but again, it's hard to know because Ireland aren't exactly an attacking team. So.
Yeah, that's true. But he's definitely one which I'm toying with at the moment. But let's move on to running out of time, guys. But the midfielders are 3 of them rated at 6.5 million. So the first one's Traore. I don't really need to talk much more about Traore, but he was actually a very useful player. What he's done last season, he added end product to his game. He's always been criticized as being someone that is all huff and puff. He's very very good dribbler. He's good at going past the man, but there was nothing more to his game. He wasn't providing anything. But him and Jimenez had a wonderful partnership. So if you're looking for someone that's going to offer a cheaper route but possibly quite a few goals and assists, he's someone to look at. Now this one I'm really excited to see this season. Obviously I hope he doesn't do too well, but he's at Man City and it's the one Phil Foden. I think at 6.5 million with Sane now gone, I don't think Ferran Torres is going to be thrust in so readily. He's definitely one to look out for. He could play in midfield, although I expect Bernardo Silva to play there now that David Silva's gone. But I can definitely see him playing on the wing, perhaps instead of Mahrez. I think Mahrez is another one who's valued at 8.5 million. I had him last season, especially after the restart. He was phenomenal. So those are ones to look out for. Now this one, Adam Lallana, 6.5 million. He's at Brighton. Injury prone, yes, but he's going to be the main man there. And he's still a wonderful footballer, excellent feet, good vision. I'm interested to see how he plays at Brighton. He's probably someone I'm not going to put in, but he's definitely one to consider. And finally, I know we said 3, but this one is too much of a bargain, and that's Bukayo Saka at 5.5 million. He's going to be playing in midfield. Phenomenal player. His assist record, I'm not really sure off the top of my head, but it was very, very, very good for a player of his age. I'd class him in a similar category to Greenwood in terms of ability or potential to be an excellent player. Greenwood's now 7.5 million. He's someone that I am toying with to bring in as well because he's excellent value, but he's gone up a lot. He was 4.5 last season. So, you'd be probably looking at him and thinking, okay, can I bring a Martial in? Then probably not. Bruno, probably not. So I'm a bit wary of United players because you don't know how they're going to perform. But you're talking about the attackers, and then we'll go on to the final section, which is the new transfers that have just come in.
Yeah. So again, the attackers for me, when you look at it at an overall, if you're looking for value, the one I always go to is Raul Jimenez. So he's the one that plays every game. He scores the majority of Wolves' goals. And really can't go wrong with him if you're going for kind of the middle of the way. So you don't want to spend all the way up at the Jamie Vardy level. He's a little bit down with 8.5 million. Then the rest of them are kind of around the 6 or 6.5. One that I'll speak about a little bit later is Callum Wilson for Newcastle. But some of the other players that come through, one of the new lads as well, Rodrigo for Leeds, is a good option. But 2 that kind of stuck out were Che Adams for Southampton. He scored a couple of goals towards the end of the season there. So again, going back to the post-lockdown, what players kind of came through and played well. And then also Jordan Ayew for Crystal Palace ended up with 132 points, which isn't too bad for the likes of Crystal Palace. But the problem with the strikers is when you get down to that level, you are kind of guessing on some of the newer players to the league because that's where they tend to start. So if you're looking for a definite at that point and looking for a bit of a bargain, my main one would be Raul Jimenez.
I agree completely. Striker is a difficult one, isn't it? Because what you see is that a lot of them score in bursts. So you got to bring them in, and then you got to know when to take them out again. If you look at, last season, Ings was probably not one of those, but Ayew scored in bursts for me, and I think it was probably one of those where you could profit in the short term, but when you move forward, he's probably not the long-term option. Again, Mason Green was another one that scored in bursts. He scored a lot of goals last season for his age. After the restart is where he really, really, really excelled. So, yeah, striking one's difficult one to assess, but I would say Raul Jimenez for me is pretty much a shoo-in. Okay, last section, guys, and this is the new transfers that have come in. We've only got 5 more minutes left, so make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll be on every week. Every Thursday we'll be recording, releasing on Friday. But let's go. You've already mentioned one of them, and that is Rodrigo. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting one, and you're looking at the price of 6 million. Rodrigo is a player, I think, which will definitely just leads to a next level in terms of the quality he brings. I mean, it wasn't long ago that he was linked to Barcelona and Real Madrid. Very good player. Obviously, the worry is how is he going to settle? That's always the worry. You could be a fantastic player. We've seen it with Veron and Diego Forlan, but it's about settling into the Premier League. The way Bielsa his style of play and the way he sets out his teams, I actually have very little worry about how he will settle. I think he'll be very, very good. The issue is they're playing Liverpool first game, but if I was looking for a budget option at 6 million, I mean, there's not many better out there. And so that's what the first new signing. The second one is pretty obvious, and I think a lot of people will be eagerly looking towards this one, and that is James Rodriguez. Now, rated or valued at 7.5 million. This is a tough one because we know that Ancelotti likes to play 4-4-2. When I've done podcasts with Ciaran before, and I've done other podcasts with South American journalists, they worry that he's not quick enough to be a right winger, probably. He's probably not direct enough, and he's also doesn't do enough defensive duties to play in that 2-man midfield. So hence why they bought Alan and Decore. So I think you might see him playing as a second striker just behind a Richarlison. I think he'd be very good. Remember, he's got great set pieces. He probably will take set pieces. He's a good free kick taker, corners. So I think he's one to definitely look at. But I'm a bit wary about Everton because you don't know how they're gonna play. Yeah. But they're always a risk. But I think we'll talk about it tonight in the weekly show. But I think they could be dark horses. Finally, this one's also an obvious one. All of mine are obvious ones. But Timo Werner at 9.5 million, he's considerably less than the other strikers. I honestly think he's going to take the Premier League by storm. A lot of fans are going out there saying it's the German league. Well, his numbers are up there just behind Lewandowski. He's up there with the best of Europe. He's an excellent player. He's quick. He's got an eye for goal. He can score in the box. He can score, obviously, outside the box. My only worry is whether he'll play lone striker. That's the first one because he didn't play that much. And I do worry that will it take him time to settle? And you've got Ziyech and Havertz as well. There's a lot of new players in there, and it does take time to gel. So, Ciaran, I went on too long there, but tell me your 3 bargains.
Yeah, new signings. Just going back on the Werner one there. The one reason why I probably wouldn't have him in is because I think he's 9.5 million, which is 0.5 more than Martial is. So when you have Martial, who was second top scorer, you're really looking for Werner. It might be a bit too much. That seems like it's the new signing. Jack up the price a little bit. So the 3 that I have, the first one, again, going back to Chelsea, was Kai Havertz. So I don't think I need to go on about kind of the ability that he has, but with the amount of attacking options Chelsea now have, I just feel like he is a good option to be able to get to rack up the assists and kind of be involved. I would expect that he'll probably play every single game, because I really can't see the likes of Mason Mount and stuff coming in for him unless he really needs a rest. For me, he could be the player that you see when Bruno came in for United, that he could be the one that can make things tick for Chelsea. And the second one is one I mentioned earlier, was Callum Wilson. So again, he didn't have the best season with Bournemouth last year. He still got over 100 points. I think the previous year he got 138 points. And that's good for a Bournemouth side that didn't really attack as much. They were more defensive minded last season. With Newcastle, they're bringing in a couple of of nice players in there. You see Ryan Fraser coming in as well. So I think there's going to be more chances. And the fact that Joe Linton didn't really produce anything last year, having Callum Wilson in there, I think it's a better option, and it's a good one for 6.5 million as well. So those were kind of the main two, and then the last one was Willian. So he's consistently gotten over 100 points, and I think that for me, he's probably going to start every single game for Arsenal. So you would expect anyway, unless there's a couple of new signings that we don't know of just yet. But he could be one to really consider for that position. So they're kind of the three. There's a couple of others that have come in, like you've seen the likes of Ollie Watkins coming in for Aston Villa and stuff now, but we don't really know how they're going to settle into the Premier League. But if you're looking for a new signing that you know how he's going to settle in with his new club, I think Willian is one that you could possibly go to, because again, he's playing the Premier League for years now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some great options there. And look, my thing with Willian is he scores in bursts. Yeah. That's the thing. He's obviously over 100 points, but he's not consistent in his actual game. But no, that's a great option. Ciaran, thank you very much for joining me today. And what we'll do is we'll put the code for the league. We've created the Premier League Trio League. We'll put that in the description below. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. And next week, Ciaran, hopefully, you'll be hosting.
Yeah.
And yeah, give Ciaran a follow, give the page a follow, and we will see you next week.